I'll basically quickly try to wrap up with the stimulus representations part and then have Professor Bapi take over and talk about the brain decoding part. So before the break, I talked about text stimulus representations. Now I'm going to talk about visual stimulus representations. So the earlier pieces of work used methods which were popular in computer vision community in those days. So visual filter banks, Gabor wavelet pyramids. And then as deep learning progressed, people actually started taking in that progress into the neuroscience community as well. So HMAX is more like a primitive CNN. So folks use that. And then, of course, I mean, most of the recent models basically use CNNs when it comes to visual stimuli. So visual stimuli now, earlier data sets, in fact, were not even naturalistic images. So in 2008, when folks experimented neuroscience experiments with visual stimuli, they were done using some of those images were just binary, were just some patterns. While in some other cases, yes, there were some naturalistic images which were used. So in either way, what the features that were used were basically Gabor wavelet pyramids, which would look for certain kinds of patterns with respect to spatial frequency, right? So and orientation. So as you see, these kinds of patterns, people would apply those filters, try to extract those kinds of frequency patterns and spatial patterns and orientation-based patterns, and then come up with representations for an image. This is what computer vision used to do before CNNs came in, right? But post that, over time, CNN-ish kind of model started coming up, like HMAX model. So this model is like a CNN, which is very close to the way neurologists think that the visual cortex system works. So there are simple cells and there are complex cells, and there are several layers of them. So therefore, at the base, you would basically have some edge detectors, and then you would have some more complex cells. Essentially, they also had max pooling in them, but then the simple cells basically would not be the convolution operation as we know of right now. They would be edge detectors or some sort of other operations like Gaussian with mean and with some Gaussian smoothing being applied and so on. Right. So that was the HMAX model. But then more recently, convolution neural networks are being used. And as we know about them today, yes, of course, there are convolution layers, pooling layers, ReLU, activation, and so on. Right. Now, for word stimuli, in fact, some people also used these convolution neural networks to represent word stimuli. So the way you would do this is to essentially, of course, one way of doing this for sentences is to basically come up with a word embedding representation for every word in the sentence, and then run a one-dimensional filter. But the other way to just come up with a good visual representation for a word is to take the word and then gather most relevant images by doing some search using a search engine, and then taking those images and computing CNN representations on top of them. That gives you a visual representation, for example, or a CNN-based representation for the word car, right? And then, people have experimented with various kinds of models: AlexNet, VGGNet, Inception, ResNet, DenseNet, and so on. You could also, by the way, use the objects as features. So if you basically have a visual a visual stimuli, you could take this particular visual stimuli and come up with objects. Now, clearly, several object detection methods are very popular today. So you could either do those object detection methods directly. You basically do object detection, figure out objects, their names, and then those names you can actually do semantic encoding. So either you could use some sort of fast text embeddings, so as to get semantic embeddings, so as to get representations for those words, or you could use topic models and so on. Right. Now, in some cases, yes, these features were too many. So therefore, in some cases, people actually also resorted to doing a PCA and then just using a smaller dimensional representation of these objects coming in, or of the word embeddings corresponding to the objects which were detected by object detectors in the images. People have also used semi-supervised CNNs. So the problem is scarce data. So, and this was very popular as a method way back when the existing pre-trained models were not that great. So if you are basically trying to do brain encoding decoding in a particular domain where there was not enough data, Then you would essentially use autoencoders so as to essentially come up with really good visual representations. Again, these autoencoders were CNN based, right? And then you would essentially have a good pre-trained, encoder, convolution encoder, and then you would basically use that with the kind of images that you would have in that domain, so as to come up with the representations that can be passed on for brain decoding or brain encoding purposes. In fact, this is another paper from our group where we essentially tried to combine LSTMs with convolution neural networks. So here the idea was that maybe we can do predictions of these brain activations slice by slice. So fMRI voxels are, this kind of information, of course, is available for the entire volume, but then it is also available slice by slice. So can you take the image? So in this architecture, the way we do this is as follows. We take the image and then we run an exception model, in some ways, some CNN model in that senses, right? We have that representation, the CNN embedding, right? We pass it to an LSTM. The first, in the first part, the LSTM tries to predict the first slice. And then it uses this information to predict the second slice, along with, of course, the CNN embedding of the image that is essentially given to every input. Okay, so basically we make slice by slice predictions using a CNN LSTM kind of framework, as you see here. Okay. The stimuli here still remains essentially captured using a CNN kind of a model. But then the nice point is that here for decoding, for encoding purpose, to guess the brain activations, we are sort of encoding by doing slice by slice predictions. More recently, of course, latent diffusion models have become popular. So essentially, you might have heard about diffusion models, and diffusion models essentially try to take an image, and the diffusion process tries to essentially get to the latent vector corresponding to that image. In fact, the latent diffusion models these days are super efficient. They first take the image, try to use an autoencoder setup so as to get latent representations, and then they apply diffusion process on those latent representations. In fact, in this kind of setup, there are two processes. One of them is the diffusion process, which takes an image from the training data and tries to obtain a noisy vector, or in fact, the idea is to basically get complete noise vector at the end. On the way, learning the parameters of the diffusion process. However, on the other hand, you start with the noise vector, and this is what, in fact, you do at generation time. You start with the noise vector, and then you have a denoising unit, which basically tries to get you a latent vector, which can be decoded back to a real image, to an image of this kind, Okay. Latent diffusion models are super popular these days because of models like CLIP or models like Stable Diffusion, DALI2, and so on, right? Which enable you to generate images, almost realistic images. Now, these latent diffusion models can also be made conditional in nature, which basically means that you can actually supply conditioning information and thereby generate images which correspond to those conditioning information. And what these models in neuroscience do is to have conditioning information provided using fMRI. So you can basically say, here are fMRI brain activations. Can I basically generate images based on them, right? And therefore, these representations essentially are quite popular because now people have been able to come up with the representations that look pretty similar to the ones that the participant was shown when the fMRI recording was done. So in the first row, what you see here are the images that were shown to the participant, and then you recorded fMRI brain recordings, and using those fMRIs without knowing the original image, people were able to reconstruct what is shown at the bottom. Now, isn't that magic? I mean, that's like saying that, yes, I mean, I can actually just try to see this guy's brain recordings, and then I can actually see what this guy has seen, right? So it's like, there are also some papers which sort of are like, hey, maybe this is a good way of decoding what dreams the person is having, while sleeping. Okay, so that's that. So that's about visual stimuli. Now, audio stimuli, there is not too much of work in the audio domain, but recently more and more data sets are coming up. Older stimulus representations used typical features that one can obtain using PyAudio or Librosa libraries. So like word rate, phoneme rate, presence of phonemes, MEL frequency, Capstrom coefficient features, MEL spectrogram features, and then even features based on MEL spectrogram itself, zero crossing, and so on. Right? But more recently, people have been using deep learning and deep neural networks for doing audio stimuli representations as well. For example, SoundNet is one of those popular audio stimulus representation architectures where you could essentially you can take unlabeled video. So if you just have audio, you can just take audio as well, but you can take the unlabeled video, and then you can actually pass the raw waveform through this CNN-ish architecture, which essentially outputs an audio representation. But if you also have the visual frames, you can actually try to come up with a representation where come up with a representation such that the audio representation and the visual representation are in sync with each other, right? So that's that. Now, of course, more recently there have been many other audio kind of models which have been proposed, but it has to be seen, how these kinds of models become popular in the neuroscience community. Very recently, in fact, we have had a paper in Interspeech where we have experimented with several kinds of audio models, including Wav2Net and Wav2Net 2.0 and many other models which are popular in the speech community. In fact, we've also experimented. So just like in natural language processing, there's this benchmark called GLUE, and I talked about text stimuli representations, which can be obtained using fine-tuned models on GLUE benchmark datasets. Similarly, in the speech world, you have a benchmark called as Superb, and we have also recently experimented with trying to use these sound-based models fine-tuned on various tasks in the Superb benchmark, and then see which of them gives you better encoding accuracies, right? So these tasks could include, automatic speech recognition, speaker recognition, emotion recognition from speech, and so on. So several tasks, and then there again, we have observed that automatic speech recognition gives you really good results in terms of brain encoding. Okay, so now let me quickly talk about multimodal stimulus representation. So these representations are super important when your stimulus actually contains two or more than two kinds of modalities. So, for example, processing videos requires audio plus image representation, right? So essentially, and therefore, some people have essentially just did that. I mean, if there is audio, sure, let me use SoundNet. If there is image, let me use VGG, and then combine the representations at the end. So those are called as late fusion models. You fuse the representations, but towards the end, right? Similarly, there have been image plus text kind of combinations as well. So people have taken data sets which have image stimulus along with, say, sentence about the image and so on. And then again, people have just done the same thing. For text, basically you use Glove or Elmo, BERT, and so on. While for images, you basically use VGG or any of the other popular image processing, image stimulus-based deep learning representations. Okay. However, more recently, in fact, we worked on multimodal stimuli using multimodal deep learning models. Okay, so this is again, work from our group where we basically took a multimodal stimuli. So, there is a text part and there is an image part, right? And then we used various multimodal transformers. Of course, because this was the first paper trying to apply multimodal transformer representations on this multimodal stimuli. We also compared with several other unimodal as well as simpler multimodal architectures. For example, we experimented with the pre-trained CNNs. We also experimented with pre-trained text transformers separately, just using the text modality and just using the speech modality, right? And then we also leveraged image transformers. So essentially, just to basically capture the image modality, we have, we basically not just used the pre-trained CNNs. More recently, image transformers have also become popular. So we also experimented with the beat architecture, bidirectional encoder representation from image transformers, or others like vision transformer. And then, as I mentioned, we also experimented with late fusion models because that's the obvious, that has been the obvious ways of combining the image modality and the text modality together. VGNet combined with Roberta or ResNet combined with Roberta and so on. And then lastly, we also experimented with multimodal transformers. So leveraging the state of the art. So essentially clip models, LXMERT models, visual BERT models, and so on. We found that visual BERT performs the best. In fact, we have done more kinds of analysis, like trying to figure out, which layers of the visual BERT model give you the best performance in terms of brain encoding accuracies. We've also done some really fancy, tasks. So For example, it's a very interesting question. If I'm looking at an image and I'm, as a human, if I'm trying to describe it using a sentence, which parts of my brain are involved, right? It's like technically called as the image capturing task. And the question that I'm asking here is that if I'm looking at an image and then I'm trying to sort of, come up with a caption, so which parts of my brain are actually doing image captioning? So those kinds of questions now can be answered very nicely using these multimodal transformer-based representations over multimodal stimuli, especially if you have fMRI representations with such multimodal stimuli, right? So that's that. Now that was the initial first part of this tutorial, and we sort of wrap it up here. In summary, we have already talked about a basic introduction to brain encoding and decoding, where Professor Bapi Raju introduced what is brain encoding, what is brain decoding, what do cognitive neuroscience people do, right? What are interesting questions? Then we talked about popular data sets, um, audio, video, multimodal, speech-based, text-based data sets. And in this session, and of course, before the coffee break, I also talked about various kinds of stimulus representations, text-based representations, speech-based representations, multimodal representations, and so on. Right. Now, Professor Bapi Raju will take over, and he will sort of talk about deep learning representations for brain decoding. Post that, we'll have lunch break, and then Mariya will join in, where she will basically start talking about deep learning for brain encoding. Okay, so any questions before we move over to Professor Bapi Raju's part? If you think of it, cognitive neuroscience is a very awesome field to be studying at this point. Thanks to super awesome advancements in deep learning, what I find very exciting is to be able to, the cognitive neuroscience sort of gives you this satisfaction and this interesting insight into how your brain works. Right? And with all the advancements that are happening, both in the deep learning field, also in the field where, in the hardware field. So the way you take these measurements, the scale at which these datasets are becoming available, cognitive neuroscience has become like a green area for several students to do a whole bunch of research work on. So, I mean, as of now, we are working on several papers in various areas. So if you basically are like a student interested in this area, looking to join, please feel free to also connect with us for research collaborations later. But that's that. I'll hand it over to Professor Bapi Raju and take it over from here unless there are any questions. Yeah.
Small questions.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. Just curious from a neuroscience point of view, to implement or simulate AND gate and OR gate.
Hey, sorry, the question was somewhat audible, but not clearly. So Pritham or someone can repeat it, is it?
I'll repeat. So from a neuroscience point of view, is there what is the mechanism, or is there a mechanism to simulate AND gate, like logic AND and logic OR?
Oh, from a neuroscience perspective, yeah, I mean, I think those gates, you can simulate those gates, but why would you want to do that is the question, right? I mean, in the sense that—
I'm just curious.
Yeah. I see. Yeah, I mean, I think, I mean, I'm not very sure why would you want to simulate it using natural mechanisms, right? See, cognitive neuroscience just builds on deep learning. And if you ask me that, hey, are there neural models, artificial neural models, which can simulate
AND gates?
That's
solve the problem. That's
a solved problem, exactly, right?
Yeah.
Now, now, if your question is that, yeah, if your question is that if natural, neurons inside us, are they acting as like AND gates or OR gates? I don't think people have tried to look at it at that level. I mean, I think people have tried to look at it at a more broader level, where you can take a stimuli and try to understand. I mean, at a much more abstract level, rather than really talking about the basic unit of processing in the sense that is it AND gate or OR gate. I mean, of course, people have tried to do experiments with a single neuron, and that is how, in fact, people designed various activation functions, saying that, I mean, in fact, there are very old YouTube videos about neurologists trying to do experiments with all those electrodes and then trying to figure out that, yes, if there is an edge moving in, if there's an edge coming in, there's an edge detector which can be trained using neurons and so on. Beyond that, I think more so in the recent times, people have been experimenting with more abstract representations rather than deep, detailed gate-based representations. Professor Bapi, please feel free to add. I mean, that was my answer. That was my thoughts. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I guess if we go back to 1940s, McCulloch and Pitts were one of the early. McCulloch was a neuroscientist who tried to look at how the all or none model of spiking patterns of neurons, how these could support logic gates, and he along with a logician, Pitt, have written a book detailing all the kinds of logic circuits that are possible, where the essential neural processing is retained, but an abstract mathematical model. And this sort of forms the basis for later models like perceptrons and multi-layer perceptrons. This is a whole. So the basis and the excitement from, I would say, 1940s has been the ability of these neuron-like elements implementing basic logic gates. In fact, I would just go on to add, von Neumann was inspired by these kind of models, but took a different direction of proposing a digital architecture based on these on-off elements, right? I mean, of course, the rest is history, as we could say. So I think the basic logical operations are somewhat, I think, is the basis for most of the modern developments in neural networks, I would say. Okay, so yeah, let me share my screen. There are no other questions. We'll next 1 hour or so before the lunch break, we'll look at a couple of examples of brain decoding models, details of a couple of them. And this is to sort of supplement and extend the detailed presentation on stimulus representations from different modalities that Manish took us through in a very exhaustive manner. Right, so what, yeah, so I will basically, this is the sort of agenda for next 50 minutes or 1 hour. I'll start with sort of asserting the difference between encoding and decoding. Then we look at basic strategies of nonlinear or linear models for building these decoding engines. And today we look at language decoding using 3 or 4 papers that we have chosen from a whole collection. And there is a recent survey which lists about more than 30 studies in the last 5 to 6 years that have built either decoding or encoding models. And so it's a very sort of emerging and happening area within computational neuroscience or applications of AI in cognitive neuroscience. We'll look at a couple of those examples, including our own one. So as we discussed, encoding it takes you from stimulus representation to brain activity. And in this case, the brain activity is the functional MRI. It could be EEG, it could be MEG, any kind of activity that you have NARS, then optical recording, NIRS recording, that any of those activations. So going from learning a model to predict brain activity is the encoding process. It tells us basically encoding models allow us to, these are process models that they can be interpreted as process models and constraining computational theories of the brain. right? On the other hand, decoding takes brain activity and tries to predict the stimulus representation or stimulus category or representation, or actually reconstruct the stimulus. In some sense, it is what Manish has tried to convey. The excitement is like reading the mind. I give you the brain activity, and can you predict what kind of stimulus the person might have been experiencing to give rise to this kind of brain activity? Of course, this problem is much more complex, difficult, and in some sense ill-posed, in the sense that there are many representations that are compatible with the same brain activity, right? And the brain also being complex dynamical system, that its activation may not be related to a single sort of stimulus representation. So decoding in general is very relevant for cognitive neuroscientists interested in how semantic information is represented in the brain, how brain represents the meaning in the cortical activation, as well as to computational linguists who are interested in the cognitive plausibility of the distributional models like BERT, starting from early word embedding models like Wav2Vec, GLOVE, BERT, and the recent large language models. What is their cognitive plausibility can also be assessed by their ability to, by their concordance with the way brain represents linguistic information. So these are some of the possibilities, but let's go into the details. So in brain decoding, the idea is, can we reconstruct the stimulus given the brain response, the features of the stimulus, either in a categorical setting like this? I show image of a shoe, and there is a recorded brain activity. Use that activity to predict whether it is a shoe or a cat, right? For example, which category that this activation belongs to. And given a test stimulus of a different image, shoe image, is it possible to still predict the category of the stimulus? Right, so the other more nuanced linguistic decoding is where you acquire the functional MRI and the brain activation represented as voxels, which are selected. I'll talk about this in next slides more detail. These activity in these selected regions and voxels and the corresponding activation vector. Can we use this through a model decoder? Can we predict the representation of the word that has actually excited this activity, that has caused this activity? The stimulus representation in the form of word embedding instead of simple category information. This is also a part of decoding. And in the next stage, actually reconstruct the word that corresponds to this embedding. Right, so in this case, the dog is the word that the decoder predicts given this brain activity. Of course, this linguistic decoding can utilize features from models like BERT, fuse this feature vector from the functional MRI in order to actually let the language encoder predict the corresponding lexical item that corresponds to this input, right? This linguistic decoding. So there are two broad approaches, just to kind of group them: the linear models and nonlinear models. In the linear models, you take an object, an image. This is from this Horikawa Kamitani data 2018, where participants were shown objects, and then or a label is given, and they are supposed to imagine the properties of the object that corresponds to this label. The functional MRI activity, brain activity, is used to build a decoder to predict the feature pattern, features of the stimulus pattern that might have caused this brain activity. And these features could be used to either predict the label, one among the various labels, jet or turtle or leopard or a skyscraper and so on. And you could use a ridge regression model to actually predict the stimulus representation as an output, or a logistic regression to actually predict the classification. Given this activity, the person might be thinking class 1 object versus class 3 object, right? So it's a classification that you actually learn to predict. So of course, this stimulus representation prediction is much harder in general. And the people also have used, instead of just selecting voxels through some schema, a selection schema, or for example, one of the schema that is used is how predictive are these activations, which of the 1 lakh voxels that are active are more highly related to the target concepts or words. You select a subset of them as a feature vector, like in this case, this feature activity, brain activity vector, consisting of activations of voxels that you can identify, or you can model this in a more complex way. Is the 3D brain image scan is fed to a 3D CNN, for example, and then come up with a feature vector that represents the brain activity, and use this feature vector to do the decoding task, either classification or stimulus representation prediction or reconstruction. Right. So this deep CNNs are used to actually process the brain imaging activation vector. So the next task for us is, given we have some broad understanding of how these models and what kind of models are used to build these decoding models, how do we evaluate the performance of these models? There are 2 metrics that I talk about, actually 3 things that I talk about. Pairwise accuracy is one common metric that is used, where if this is the stimulus, this is the concept word that I'm showing a sentence of, the concept here is apartment. The sentence that uses this concept is presented, and there is another concept, jth concept, that uses another sentence that uses a different concept, jth concept, which is here building. Of course, apartment and building are related, but they are different. One is more specific, one is more general, right? So those concept words and the corresponding. So you actually predict the representation, semantic vector representation coming from this decoding model, right? The model that we have built, it predicts this semantic vector. This is the original vector, the ground truth, and yi hat is the corresponding decoded semantic vector. Similarly, for this jth concept, this is the actual, this could be, for example, 300-dimensional glove vector, or BERT representation vector, or a Wav2Vec type of representation of the word building, for example. This is the ground truth. Yj is the ground truth for building, and yj hat is the decoded semantic vector from a model that you have built. For example, a ridge regression model that you have built. This is the decoded. These are predictions. These are predictions from the decoder. And this pairwise accuracy says that you match the decoded vector of yi hat with yi, and look at the correlation. Similarly, Yj hat with its ground truth correlation, and also do the opposite, right? The decoded semantic vector with yi hat, how similar it is to another concept vector. Similarly, yj hat, the prediction for the jth concept, how similar it is to this. So both within concept similarities and across concept similarities are computed, and the pairwise accuracy is computed if the within pair sum of these correlations. For example, one of the ways of computing similarity is a Pearson correlation, the Pearson or cosine similarity between these two vectors. So any of these are used, and the similarity score of within I to I and J to J, the sum of this should be greater than the cross correlation. Then we say that the decoder is able to distinguish these concepts, and these vectors are further away. These cross representations are further away compared to the within concept predictions. Right, so this average over all the test instances for a participant is given as a pairwise accuracy score. Right, so this is what is written. If this correlation of yi to yi hat and yj to yj hat, the sum of this is greater than the other cross pairs, then we give a score of 1, otherwise 0. And we score like this for every pair, and average pairwise accuracy is computed for all the test stimuli for each participant separately. And this is what is reported as the decoding model's performance, one performance measure of the decoder. The other metric is rank accuracy. How well the decoded vector, right? So this is the decoded semantic vector for this. What kind of rank does it enjoy across all the other semantic vectors, the ground truths of all the other semantic vectors? So we hope that ith concept, apartment decoded semantic vector, is more highly related to apartment text semantic vector, ground truth, compared to all the others. So we rank order them, these correlations, you compute the correlation, and you rank order these, and we look at the rank that this decoded semantic vector has compared to all the other test instances within all the other semantic vectors within your concept base. And the lower the rank, I mean, the rank 1 is better than rank 2 and so on. And we look at the average rank that the decoder has for across all the decoded semantic vector instances per participant. So this average rank score or accuracy is another metric that is also reported for decoder evaluation. Okay, so the rank accuracy is computed as based on these statistics from this sort of estimation, the evaluation process. The other metric that is also used sometimes is what is called representational similarity matrix, and the concept is like this. And suppose the person is experiencing different scenes, scene 1 to scene 20, the brain activation is recorded. The pairwise similarity across, this is representational similarity from the visual cortex of the participant, the brain activation corresponding to scene 1, how well it is correlated with brain activations with the other scenes when they are seeing the other scenes. Right? Obviously, the diagonal is very high, close to 1. I mean, actually equal to 1, because you want to see that the scene 1 is correlated, and these cross correlation tell how similar the brain activations are when they are seeing scenes of different kinds. So this matrix, this 20 by 20 matrix in this case, represents the is called the representational similarity matrix of brain activations associated with participants' viewing of these 20 scenes. So the matrix elements here are the correlations of each pair of scenes that they are looking at. This correlation obtained from brain activation. Right, it is also possible. I can right here. So this is what is you can actually talk about either similarity or dissimilarity. Dissimilarity is just one minus similarity. And this kind of matrix sometimes is also used, is called a representational dissimilarity matrix. And the analysis, one of the interesting things about this RSA analysis is that it is possible to compare model representations and brain representations without actually directly comparing them. It's a powerful approach where the model is given, right, scene 1 to scene 20, for example. This is a decoder. In this case, this model is actually decoding type of object, cat, dog, ball, and so on. What are the representations learned in the hidden layer corresponding to each of these? And suppose there are 20 concepts, and what is the pairwise correlation or similarity or dissimilarity across all pairs of these concepts? So here, what you're comparing is what is the representation that this model learns and how similar are representations across pairs of concepts. In this case, objects and so on. And if you have a brain activity associated with this, you can also come up with a brain DSM, which compares the activation vector associated with pairs of these objects, how similar they are, and summarize them in this kind of dissimilarity matrix, and look at how similar these two matrices are through some sort of a metric. For example, representation similarity metric, how correlated these are. That gives you whether the model and the brain have a similar representational dynamics when they are encountering these different concepts. So this is one kind of representational, evaluation metric for the decoder models, right? So in the next part, another 45 minutes, I'm planning to discuss a few examples of decoders that are presented in the recent times. As you can see, these are happening in the last 4 or 5 years. This is a paper from Pereira et al. 2018, Nature Communication, which looks at word-level universal brain decoder. Let's go into the details. Classical decoding solutions. So brain decoding was introduced by Tom Mitchell in 2008. There's a series of papers from Tom Mitchell from CMU group, who has looked at decoding solutions, extracting linguistic meaning from imaging data related to concrete nouns. So these are drawings of different objects, and participants are viewing them along with this label. And some of these are concrete nouns like hammer, and and all of these are concrete objects. They use similar stimuli for training and testing, and the semantic categories are smaller in number. Given the time of this work, 2008, the categories they used were animals, body parts, vegetables, vehicles, and there are several few exemplars of each of these category. Participants viewed these, and they built a decoding model associated with these concepts, and they have built successfully decoding models from brain activity, where the brain activity is used to predict which category of stimulus the participant is experiencing currently. And this paper published by Pereira et al. Builds on this work. On this earlier work is presented a new approach for brain decoding, where a large semantic space is explored, 180 different concepts, both abstract and concrete topics are used. These are gleaned from a large corpora, from various corpora, and words and sentences are represented as, and so this representation schemes Manish went through. In this case, they use global vector for word representation of glove vector. 300-dimensional glove vector is the representation for all these concepts. In this case, these vary across several dimensions, concrete, abstract. And subjects read these linguistic stimuli on topics that vary, as I said, both in concrete topics as well as abstract, such as pleasure, justice, love, etc. And this is the glove representation introduced by Pennington et al. 2014. That is what is used to represent these words. And going to the details of the experiment, they have asked subjects to look at 3 different views. Right. Let me start with these 3 views, where the first experiment includes a concept plus picture view, where they are shown a picture of in this case, the concept is bird, a picture of a bird, and in one case, and in the other case, they are shown a concept and related words in the sort of a word cloud format. This is what the participants see. For example, for the bird concept, they see this word cloud view on the screen. In another scenario, they have the sentences that represent use this idea of bird, right? So they look at this sentence. So the concept word in all these cases is bird. Similarly, wash, unaware. So some are quite abstract, some are very concrete. And these 3 views correspond to the 3 recordings associated with a word cloud view, picture view, sentence view. All these recordings are done in experiment 1. And there were 180 concepts that were used that had 128 nouns, both nouns, verbs, adjectives, function words. The 16 participants, this is one of the largest data sets that is available publicly for experimentation. And they have nicely given the labeled regions, brain regions. This is an atlas of the brain that labels what is the name of each region. And so they have looked at both diverse areas, 333 regions, or a smaller number corresponding to an AAL atlas, automated anatomical labeling atlas of 180 regions. So the brain activity and the stimulus representations are provided. In experiment 2 and 3, they did 3 experiments and reported. They show sentences either in this format where there's a topic and musical instrument is the topic, and different kinds of instruments, clarinet, accordion, piano. Sentences that use these are shown. And in another experiment, the passages on the same topic, gambling, there are different passages that are shown to the participants. So, and the glove representation for all of this is also provided, is arrived at by averaging all the content words, the glove representations of the content words. If it is a sentence, all the content words and the corresponding glove representation are taken, average, and that constitutes the embedding or sentence representation for that, the representation for that sentence. Similarly for passage and so on. So they have the overall pipeline looks like this. A stimulus is given to the participant. The brain activity associated with that is recorded, and based on this 3D brain activation, informative voxels are selected, and I'll talk about that in a second. On the other side, you have this, the apartment is represented as a as a glove vector, 300 dimensional glove vector. This is the semantic vector associated with this stimulus. Now, what you are learning is to predict this vector from the brain activation. In its typical decoding task, this brain image is taken as the input. In this case, a voxel and all the neighbors in the 3D neighborhood are taken as and as input, and a ridge regression tries to predict this semantic vector for apartment. One small detail here is that in this particular implementation, each dimension is predicted separately. So there are 300 models that are built and that try to predict each of the dimensions of this semantic vector. And now, given X is the input, W is the model, Y is the output from the model, we compare with the ground truth. If right, so ground truth is this, and what is the correlation between the ground truth and the prediction? W of X is the prediction, Y hat, and the correlation between that is used to evaluate the decoding accuracy. So one other detail here, the informative voxels are selected, which from different regions, which are associated with which that have predictive capacity for predicting the training concepts from the brain activity. Those voxels, those activities which are highly associated with the target concept are selected. And in this particular study, 5,000, about 10% of the total voxels are selected based on their relatedness, their predictive capacity for these semantic vectors. And the whole experiment is done in a 18-fold cross-validation setting. There are 180 concepts. 170 concepts are used for training, 10 are held out, and this is repeated 18 times. And what is reported is the average over all these 18-fold experiments. Right, so these voxels are selected based on their correlation with the with this semantic vector that corresponds to the stimulus. So the pairwise and rank-wise results. The first one, experiment one, you remember there was a sentence view, there was a picture view, and there was a word cloud view. There are 3 brain activations that were recorded when participants were looking at only the picture, the concept word and the picture, or a sentence that uses that concept word, or in the word cloud format where the target word is in the middle and the related words are on the periphery. So what you see here are 4 bars that represent each of these dots is each participant. There are 18 participants that 16 participants that participated in this experiment one. These are 16 dots, and what you see is the average pairwise accuracy. Remember, this pairwise accuracy is the predicted semantic vector, how it is related to the target semantic vector, and if the correlation of that is higher than cross correlations with other concepts, right? And average of that. So there's 75% accuracy on average across all these tasks. Individual tasks are shown separately. And what you see is picture view has a higher decoding performance in terms of pairwise accuracy. Right, so a picture, I guess, is worth 1,000 words, right? The popular adage, and I guess these brain results also seem to bear that out. So these are participant numbers. The colors represent these 18 participants. Experiment 2 and 3, remember, where the sentences are presented either from different topics or same topic, or sentences from the same passage. And as you can imagine, sentences from the same passage are more difficult to decode compared to distinguishing sentences from different topics. So consequently, the pairwise accuracy for different topic decodability is much higher. Similarly, in experiment 3, where there are passages that are taken from the same the topic or same words within the same passage. So the right-hand side is rank accuracy from the 3 experiments. Remember, rank accuracy is the predicted semantic vector. What is its rank compared to all the other semantic vectors? And the lower, right, the rank accuracy, the better. Experiment 1. What you see is all these 3. It is possible to, the decoder performance is quite good in all 3 cases. It's superior in the case of experiment 1. Remember, the lower the rank, the better, right? First rank is better than second rank is better than third rank, and so on. So this rank accuracy is superior for experiment 1 on average. So decoder built from experiment 1 could distinguish. So this decoder that is built based on the concepts from the first experiment that are reused for sentence topic prediction from sentences, and passage, sentences, discrimination of sentences from same or different passages. So this decoder that's built seem to have much generalized performance. That's why this is called a universal decoder. It's a decoder built from experiment 1. It could distinguish sentences at different levels of granularity, coming from different topics or same topic but different passages or within the same passage. The decoder is actually built from experiment 1, but used to test stimuli from decoding performance from 2 and 3. So that's why this paper is labeled. It goes beyond the 2008 Mitchell's paper, which actually is a pioneering contribution in the brain decoding literature. But recently, we've taking advantage of the advances in the deep learning models and machine learning literature. So this universal decoder has. And let's look at how these activation of these informative voxels that are extracted, where do they reside? Right? What is shown here is the different networks, brain networks that these voxels belong to. And for various participants, remember that for each participant, the set of voxels would be different. But this view graph shows that on average, there are quite a few fraction of out of 5,000, a significant fraction, around more than 20%, come from voxels that are in the language area of the brain. Similarly, task related, and there are some voxels from visual and what is called default mode network. These voxel distribution, these 5,000 informative voxels are roughly distributed among the 4 networks which are relevant for a linguistic task. And overall, the language network seems to possess higher proportion of voxels. And another fact is that visual, task, and default mode, these are large networks. The brain areas associated with them are large. Even though language network by its size is small, its contribution to this linguistic decoding is high, I mean, as can be expected. And also on the right-hand side, what you see is this is brain activation across all the 16 participants who there seems to be a large activity, average activity in the language areas in the temporal and temporoparietal area and the frontal and inferior frontal regions, which are known for language related activity. And so this seems to be consistent pattern across all these participants. So the insights gathered from this first study, which I have selected for this tutorial, that it presents a viable approach for what is labeled as a universal decoder of these concepts, capable of extracting a representation of the mental content from the linguistic material. Right, so this semantic resolution of this brain-based decoding, of course, will continue to improve given there are a lot of advances. There are models which I'm not covering here, but that use recent advances in using large language models, representations derived from those, or brain activation that predict those representations. All these studies have progressed this field since 2018, when this paper was published. In the last 4 years, there's a huge number of studies, a significant number of studies that use latest advances in language models. So the next one that I'm going to talk about is one that was talked about, this Gautier et al. To 2019 from the French group, that looks at artificial and neural representations of language. Some interesting results. This has already been alluded to by the scrambled model that Manish talked about. So I will briefly talk about it, not going to re-emphasize because this has already been discussed. This is a task where participants, this is a parallel data set that they use. You already know that functional MRI brain recording was done when participants were shown pictures or of concepts or sentences that use a concept, or a word cloud that has the target concept in the center. And a neural network model that uses derives the sentence representation. And in this case, what Gautier and colleagues have done is to extract task-based representations. Instead of using only the sentence vectors, their idea was to evaluate the link between human brain activity and the representation or the neural network model, and look at this as the models are, neural network models are optimized for different tasks, right? So task specific representations are used to are used for prediction for decoding task. Right. So, and look at why these mappings are successful and what are the shared representations across models and human brain. So what they have done is look at two kinds of representation. One is from pre-trained BERT models and also fine-tuned BERT models. These models that are fine-tuned on different natural language understanding tasks, whether it's paraphrasing or sentiment analysis or Q&A or NLI, these kind of different kinds of natural language tasks. These representations that are used to train the models and also to predict the representations coming out of these task-based models, pre-trained of fine-tuned, pre-trained but fine-tuned on different tasks. Apart from this, they also designed a few custom tasks. One of them is this scrambled language model, where sentence inputs, where the words are shuffled. Fingers are used for grasping, writing. This is the original sentence, and they shuffle the words within a sentence. This model is called, and then they fine-tune this language model on this scrambled inputs. Right, so it's a pre-trained BERT, but fine-tuned on these scrambled words. The other is a scrambled paragraph, where they take the words are scrambled within a paragraph, not within a sentence, but across the sentences within a paragraph. Right. So, and this is called language model with scrambled para, and there is a baseline model which is random sort of scrambling. And they have looked at the decoding performance of several of these models, these task-based models, how well the decoder predicts the representations from these, from the brain activity. Brain activity is the input, and representations corresponding to semantic task or natural language understanding task, or this the scrambled para or scrambled models. There's also, they have done other models where the POS tags, the parts of speech tags are scrambled, right? So what you see here is the performance, the mean squared error, right? Here, mean squared error is the metric that strictly evaluates the ability of human brain activations to exactly match the representational geometry of this model activations, right? So what these brain activations are predicting these model, predicting model representations, and you're correlating with them. In this case, you're looking at a metric that looks at the difference, squared error, average squared error between these two. What you see is this, surprisingly, the scrambled para and scrambled models seem to have higher accuracy both on mean squared error as well as on the average rank. Remember the rank accuracy metric for decoder, where you the decoded representation is compared across all the other candidates and look at how well these predictions rank among all the other ground truth vectors, right? So again, the average, the lower this average rank, the better, right? So the para and scrambled seem to perform much better compared to the other models that use that try to predict representations from other tasks. Scrambled language models. So I've sort of shortlisted this for its interesting observation. So this is at different stages of fine tuning, what is the difference between the rank accuracy and the squared error? What you see here is that these models scrambled, and these have higher rank. I mean, they have better rank accuracy at different stages of fine tuning, right? 50% fine tune, 10, steps, fine tuning steps. Even after 50 steps, already you see superior performance, both in their lower mean squared error, higher good rank accuracy for these. So what we understand from this set of scrambled language modeling tasks which best match the structure of brain activation, these models optimized for fine-tuned based on scrambled inputs seem to improve the decoding performance. So as one observation from this interesting study, where the dependencies of these do not seem to matter for the decoding model. The decoding model is quite robust. So the last but one study, in the next 15 minutes, we'll talk about two more. One is this. This is a recent study, 2023 study from Alexander Huth's group, University of UT Austin. This is a recent paper, Nature Neuroscience paper, very interesting decoding exercise. This is a continuous language decoder. What we have seen so far is where you generate either a word embedding, right, an isolated word related to that concept word, or a sentence that you. So here is an attempt where you decode linguistic items continuously. So here, this decoder is built when participants, 3 subjects, are listening to 100 narrative stories. This is again a very good, nice data set. 16 hours of listening. This data recorded over several days and months from 3 participants listening to 1,000 narrative stories. An encoding model. So what you see here is an encoding model, and combined with a decoder that tries to decode what the participants are hearing as a continuous stream of linguistic labels that are predicted. So let me take you through this interesting architecture. This encoding model is built by extracting features from. So this is a narrative that's heard through the earphones, right? Headphones. So this is a speech waveform corresponding to the narrative. Features are extracted, and this feature, an encoding model is learned to predict the brain response corresponding to this narrative. When they are listening to this narrative, what are the activations in the brain? Can I predict this through an encoding model? A detailed account of how these encoding models are built will come after lunch, when Mariya will take you into encoding modeling literature. But here is an example that uses an encoding model in order profitably to improve decoder performance. Right. So this part is clear, where you have the stimulus features generate bold response. Okay, and what is shown here, this encoding model is used in this scheme, where this decoder, brain decoder, it maintains a set of candidates that to reconstruct the language from the novel brain recording, right? The decoding is, given brain recording, can you reconstruct the stimuli that they are listening to? So in order to reconstruct, the decoder maintains a set of candidate word sequences, right? I saw a dog with, I saw a big dog, I saw a dog, and so on. These are the various candidates that are maintained. And then these candidates are, when new words are detected, a language model, right, as it is, language model tries to predict, this is a language model that tries to predict based on this candidate, what are the continuations, proposed continuations of this. So I saw a dog could be continued with I saw a dog with, or I saw a dog and so on. Now, these are continuations, potential continuations for this. Now, these word sequences are, the features extracted from these are multiplied or associated, they are they are used to generate a brain activity. Remember, encoding model that you have trained, you can use it in order to predict what is the possible brain activation. If this is the continuation, what is the brain activation? So these are the predictions, and the decoder predicts what is done is these are rank ordered. The encoding model scores the likelihood of the recorded brain responses under each continuation. So the encoding model gives a rank, and the most likely continuations are retained. And so this sort of process where an encoding model, it ranks the possible brain activations, and those and the associated continuations are the decoding solutions for that are associated with a given brain activation. So this kind of encoder decoder model seem to have done very well. These are some of the results. These are actual stimulus sequences, and these are decoded stimuli. What is shown, this color code, is these are exact predictions. Some of them are exact predictions. Some of them have a gist. For example, I got up from the air mattress and pressed my face against the glass of the bedroom window. What is it? I just continue to walk up to the window and open the glass. And so some words are, of course, errors. These are erroneous words. There's a few of them are errors. So this is a view of different decoding solutions for different sentences. These are continuously generated linguistic items into as a form of continuous sentences. And what this particular graph shows is how well this decoder performs. What is the story similarity across different metrics? The BERT score is one of the recent scoring systems, which newer method which uses machine learning ideas to quantify whether two sequences share a meaning or not. Right. So on all of this, what is shown here for the three participants, the decoding, the story similarity that is based on the decoder, they are well above chance level, and the star tells you if it is statistically significant. There is a false discovery rate metric that is computed, estimated. So all these decoder performances are much above chance level. And across word error rate, blur rating, different ways to measure the story that is decoded and the original story, how similar they are. And this continuous decoder seems to perform very well. To summarize, what this particular paper, 2013 2023 paper, talks about a continuous language representations that can be decoded or reconstructed from functional MRI recordings, which are non-invasive. So we have a way to measure brain activity. From that, you can actually reconstruct what this brain activity corresponds to in terms of a continuous language representation. So given novel brain recordings, this decoder generates the stories, which are word sequences that form story, which are intelligible based on variety of metrics. We saw BERT score and various other blow and other scores that recover meaning of this experienced speech perceived, and so there are other tasks that are done. I'm not going through those in the interest of time, but leave you with this idea of exciting possibility enabling decoding. One of the important things for technologists, the decoder building is a gateway into building better brain-computer interfaces, especially for people who have challenges because of a disease or accident or whatever that compromises their linguistic function, their ability to express commands or converse in natural language is compromised. Now, these results begin to show promise in terms of their ability to one day for us to build brain, more efficient brain-computer interface models. In the last few minutes, I will talk about some of the work that we have done on multi-view and cross-view decoding. This is based on Pereira's dataset. We asked this question: can we use the information that is available within the brain activation to go from one view to the other view? Suppose I show you a concept, right? These different views of the concept word is a sentence that uses this, or the picture that uses that concept, or the word cloud that depicts the meaning in this sort of related words surrounding it. Can we use these to go from one view to the other view for this concept? Right, earlier works have explored which of these views, for example, we looked at Pereira's results, which of these views provides richer information to understand the concept. And we saw that pairwise decoding accuracy, rank accuracy for picture view was better. So what we are asking is a different question. Can we train a model with word cloud view and test it with other views, sentence view or picture view, or how general this decoding, the model that you build, how general is it to generate representations that correspond to sentence view, picture view, word cloud view, right? So itself, and similarly picture view and look at other views, and sentence view brain data used to decode representations of the other views. We label this as multi-view decoding. This is presented in Colling last year. So this, I'm straight away going to the results. These are picture view pairwise accuracy. We use BERT, and the baseline is BERT random attuned with, this is random sentences. This is a 3 built based on brain activation decoding word picture decoder. This is a sentence decoder word cloud. I am training with picture view. Obviously, picture will have higher accuracy, but what you observe here is the accuracy for decoding other views, sentence view and word cloud view, is not too bad. Of course, it is inferior to the original trained scenario, but the same model is able to decode concepts from the sentence view and a word cloud view, right? These are shuffled, trained on shuffled target concepts, right? This is rank accuracy also paints a similar picture, higher accuracy for train, but not bad, not too bad for other decoding other views, right? Rank and similar story for sentence view and word cloud view, right? So interesting thing that you see a model that is trained on sentence view has similar performance on all the other views, whereas a model trained on word cloud view has good performance in the other picture and sentence. Um, uh, yeah, so but not in its own. So pictures seems to be best accuracy, sentences for these seems to be best accuracy in this multi-view decoding concept. So the main idea here that is being explored is how general are these decoding models that we built based and their generalizability across different views. And these are the distribution of informative voxels across different brain regions, language regions, left language, right hemisphere language regions, vision. And what you see here is the proportion of informative voxels in left language regions for sentences is higher in the left hemisphere. And it is well known in cognitive neuroscience, left hemisphere specialization for language representation is bears out, and vision, a region, for example, has much more many voxels that correspond to word and picture view. Again, not very surprising, because the task here, the stimulus has rich visual information. So the vision areas have a lot more contribution to this decoder model. So the other, in the last couple of minutes, I will take you through this cross-view decoding. This is another task that we. So can we decode from one view? You know, what we looked at is going from a model built from one view. Can you generalize to other view? So the other question that we asked is, can we train with picture view, but generate captions for the images that you are seeing, right? The image captioning sort of task. The other is image tagging task. I train with picture view, and can you come up with image tags? So decode image tags, visual words, in this case, caption. And the last one is, can you actually generate a sentence formation process? So I have a decoder that is trained on brain activation. Given brain activation, it predicts word cloud view, and take this decoder, but use it to generate a sentence from that, right? Sentence formation. And the last one is keyword extraction. This is again published recently in Calling from our group, that these cross-view decoding is also feasible. These decoders that we can build are quite generic. We can quite good performance pairwise and rank accuracy for all these tasks. Of course, sentence formation is a very complex task. The accuracy is lower, but it's still feasible, much better than these shuffled models. So image captioning, keyword extraction, all these are feasible from, this is the average over all these experiments, so these different tasks, image captioning, decoding, performance, average, accuracy, and so on. So these are shuffled concepts. This BERT fine-tuned with shuffled concepts. And so the summary is that the cross-view and multi-view decoding tasks establish that so the information that is there in the brain responses is actually rich. This is what the hypothesis for us was, that the brain activation is much richer, and it is possible to utilize this to put this into service for variety of tasks. Although this activation was seen for a particular task, and you know that the brain has this distributed activation, and it is possible, our results indicate that it is possible to use this to multiple downstream tasks, right? So to summarize what I have discussed in this session, the last 1 hour, is present you with 3 different themes. One is this universal brain decoder, which has actually set off a series of investigations by various investigators. This universal brain decoder that has put this language decoding again on the in the radar. And we looked at how the artificial and human neural representations can be utilized. One exciting example that I presented is this continuous language decoder that seems to now generate continuous sentences, linguistic sequences, word sequences associated with brain activation. And the multi-view and cross-view decoding give you an idea that these decoders have a lot more oomph or representation than that can be used to actually use them for multiple downstream tasks. Okay, so this is a good time